Welcome to Access Asia, I'm Yuka Hwaye. Coming up in this edition, Donald Trump's shutdown of the US Foreign Aid Agency has sent shockwaves across Southeast Asia, including in Thailand, where medical centres serving refugees from Myanmar have been forced out of operation. Schools are closed and children are living in a haze. As air pollution continues to affect millions, UNICEF has released a new report and is calling for urgent action. As the US president begins a trade fight with China, a Trump-inspired opera has proven a hit at an iconic Hong Kong theatre that's due to close soon. We begin with the fallout of the Trump administration's decision to freeze foreign aid programs and effectively shut down USAID, the government agency responsible for international development. The impact is already felt in Thailand, home to some 90,000 refugees from Myanmar. Medical care for the displaced people has been paralysed. Leo McQuinn reports.
As the dust settles on the Trump administration decision to freeze funding to USAID, the effects are already being felt in Thailand. The Mae La camp houses thousands of refugees from neighbouring Myanmar, but now, without US funding, healthcare services in the camp have ground to a halt, forcing patients to be transferred to a local hospital. The developments have left many of the camp's residents fearing for their future.
We have no idea what will happen to us. We don't have money to buy medicines. We all will die if we don't have any medicine at the camp.
Southeast Asia as a whole will be particularly impacted by the funding cuts. USAID operates in 6 of 11 countries in the region, Thailand, as well as Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, the Philippines and Vietnam. In 2024, the agency allocated $860 million to the region alone. Another country that will be hugely affected by the cuts is Afghanistan. One of the agencies that relies on USAID is the UN Sexual Reproductive Health Agency, named UNFPA. Without it, women in Afghanistan could be in even more danger than ever.
Every 2 hours, a mother dies from preventable pregnancy complications, making Afghanistan one of the deadliest countries in the world for women to give birth.
Aside from the potential humanitarian catastrophe, concerns are growing in Washington that temporarily halting assistance opens up a window of opportunity for China. The former assistant administrator for USAID in Asia has called the decision an extraordinary setback.
The Trump administration has put America last while handing a gift to our biggest adversaries, notably China. America's alliances will suffer, U.S. partners will be at risk, and America's enemies will rejoice.
In 2018, the Chinese government created China Aid in order to streamline the country's spending. Now, some experts believe that the void left by USAID could hand China the upper hand in the battle for soft power.
It's called the silent killer. Air pollution is linked to over 100 deaths in children under the age of 5 every day across East Asia and the Pacific. That's according to a new regional-wide study released by UNICEF, focusing on just how seriously small particles and nitrogen dioxide are affecting the health and livelihoods of young children who are the most vulnerable. In recent weeks, high levels of airborne toxins have forced hundreds of schools in Bangkok to close multiple times. In much less populated Mongolia, the average level of PM2.5 can be nearly 30 times the WHO's recommended dose. UNICEF is calling on governments, businesses and parents to take action. Now, for more, we can bring in Nicholas Rees, UNICEF, a policy specialist on climate and economic analysis. Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, UNICEF's report highlights the fact that air pollution affects children's growth at every stage of their life. Could you explain that?
Sure. So every day, children in this region are breathing toxic air. And they're breathing it not just outdoors, but they're breathing it in their homes, in schools, in the playgrounds that they play in. But air pollution often doesn't get the headlines that other natural disasters do. And so what this report has found is that about 100 kids die every day in this region due to air pollution linked causes. It's a silent killer because the effects aren't immediately visible. People don't often know how bad the air is unless they have a reliable monitor. The cause of mortality are often labeled as diseases, cardiovascular or respiratory conditions such as pneumonia. But what people don't know is that the underlying risk factor is actually air pollution. In fact, about half of pneumonia cases are linked with air pollution. And finally, the effects can often take a long time to materialize. So sometimes that happens later in life as a result of damage that's caused early in life.
Now, schools have had to shut down as well recently. This means air pollution deprives children of their right to education as well, doesn't it?
Yes, children, because they've been sick because of the air pollution, they can't go to school, or the schools are shut down. So air pollution doesn't just affect their health, it affects a whole wide range of children's rights, including their right to education and learning. And it really does impact all of this, impacts their future prospects in life. And these aren't just statistics, these are children's futures effectively being stolen from them by the air they breathe.
Just how widespread is the problem in East Asia? Are rural areas impacted too?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, there isn't a single country across the 27 that we looked at here that has safe levels of air pollution according to WHO guidelines. All of them, children are breathing toxic air. About 2 out of every 3 children in the region, that's about 325 million, are breathing air that is 5 times higher than WHO guidelines. So it is very widespread, and it also does affect rural areas, like you're saying. However, some of the biggest risks in rural areas are actually from indoor air pollution, and that is using unclean cook stoves for cooking and heating. And so it's actually inside the house that children in rural areas tend to be most exposed by.
Indeed, the problem is acute in the dry season, and particularly in rural areas because of crop burning and, as you've just mentioned, use of fossil fuels indoors, inside the homes. Is it difficult for people to give up these habits?
The transition, it is difficult, but it is happening. And we've seen a huge shift in this region in terms of reducing solid fuels for indoor cooking and heating. And that has meant actually led to a huge reduction in child deaths associated with air pollution, particularly as a result of that energy transition within households. So I think the prospect for the potential for improvement is really there. With reducing indoor household air pollution, you can drastically continue to reduce the number of child deaths. More than half of the child deaths are linked with household air pollution in this region.
Now, there is, I guess, still work to be done and to raise awareness for concerted action. You're calling for concerted action by governments, businesses, educators, and parents as well. But we're also seeing the United States, UNICEF's largest donor, freezing funding and dismantling its foreign aid agency. How seriously could this impact your work?
So we work with governments across the region and really advocating for clean energy transition, advocating for a reduction in the causes of air pollution. I think that we're going to continue that work. And I think that anything we can do to continue advocating for those changes, but also advocating for changes to the health system so that they're better able to prevent exposure, monitor exposure, and treat the diseases associated with exposure will go a long way to continue that trajectory. We've seen a huge improvements over the last 20 to 30 years, and I'm confident we can continue those improvements in the years ahead.
Well, Nicholas Rees from UNICEF, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Donald Trump has begun a trade battle with China, but in Hong Kong, he took center stage at an unlikely place, the iconic Sunbeam Theatre. Veteran actor Lung Kun-tin portrayed the US president in front of a packed audience singing in Cantonese, using a traditional operatic style usually reserved for Chinese folklore. Olivia Salazar-Winspear has more.
It's not exactly a pitch-perfect version of the 47th President of the United States of America, but Trump, the twins' president, is still a huge hit here in Hong Kong. Building on an original production dating back to Trump's first term, it uses the traditional comedic codes of Cantonese opera, giving it a modern twist.
It's Cantonese opera with black humour. The development of Cantonese opera has significantly changed since Trump on Show debuted in 2019. The assassination attempt scene is definitely the show's biggest selling point.
Indeed, performer Lung Kun-tin recreates that memorable moment of Trump's campaign, but the 3-hour show also touches on geopolitical issues.
I think this is funny because it brings together different unrelated elements like time travel, China, and the US.
As well as providing comic relief, the production also hopes to introduce a new generation to a historical local art form.
Young people are curious and surprised by this presentation. I think that, objectively, it will help young people understand what Cantonese opera is, what it's trying to show, and why it can address a new topic like this one.
Unfortunately, the show comes too late for the Sunbeam Theatre, where it's playing to sold-out audiences. The venue's set to close after more than 50 years hosting Cantonese opera. But Trump, the twins' president, will be back on stage in June elsewhere in Hong Kong and also hopes to go on a world tour.
That's it for this week's Access Asia, but please do stay tuned if you can for more world news on France 24.